I'm very aware we can get lost in this bit if we're not careful. Satan's throne. The place where Satan dwells. What on earth is this? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. Pergamum saw itself as the guardian of Greek worship. In 240 BC, after a big victory, there was a great altar to Zeus built here. 40 feet high, it stood on the hill and looked a bit like a giant throne. Around it was intricate carvings which showed the Greek gods defeating the giants of the barbarians. And it has been suggested that this is what was meant by Satan's throne. And the fact that it looks a bit like a throne, well, kind of. Doesn't look like a very comfortable throne. I mean, I get it's a little bit, but it's not much. Would mean that this imagery was probably more relevant to the church when they heard it. Here's the problem with the altar of Zeus being the throne. Zeus wasn't really a threat to the church. By this time, Zeus wasn't a big deal. He was kind of old-fashioned. The time of the Greek gods had passed. Caesar worship was the big thing at this point. Greek god worship, it was kind of like a bit of a remnant. It was well regarded, but kind of like, it's a historical building that we have. This might be a strange analogy, but it's a bit like Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster Video was huge, but now it's kind of a bit of a distant memory. That's the Blockbuster Video in the town centre. And that shop is still there. This photograph was taken in 2021, and it has been empty for how long now? I mean, that's not a great sign about the town centre, but you can still go visit Blockbuster Video in the town centre, even though nobody goes there anymore and it doesn't exist as a company. Zeus was about as relevant at this point as Blockbuster Video. But people have latched on to the idea of this altar being the throne of Satan for years. It is now in Berlin. And for the Nazis, this was seen as a cultic object that they attempted to appropriate the message of in the carvings. They saw the carvings being about good over evil, gods over barbarians, and they obviously took that to be the Aryans over everybody else. It's possible Hitler saw huge occult significance in this throne. That's why he had it brought to Berlin. That's why he modeled the palace, the place where he had the rallies in Nuremberg after it. So Hitler thought it was significant. But guess what? Hitler was wrong about some stuff. I dare say we would disagree with Hitler on one or two things. Yes? So let's not assume Hitler's right about this. But it's led to all kinds of conspiracy theories. That this altar is the center of all evil in the world. Like that's how it works. This has been used by things like QAnon to really spread some weird stuff. We've made a lot of this altar, but to be honest with you, I don't see Jesus referring to this altar as a threat to the church at all. If you had to pick a temple in Pergamum, which was a threat, I guess a more likely candidate is the one at the other end of the city. Pergamum was connected to the worship of a god called Asclepius, who was a god of healing. His temples were actually the closest thing you would find to a hospital back then. That's the remains of the temple to Asclepius. Now, here's the interesting thing about Asclepius. He was known as Asclepius the Savior. Now, that's a title that belongs to Jesus. There's only one Savior, and one can imagine how abhorrent that title was to the church. but also how the church in that city can be persecuted for calling Jesus our Saviour. Another interesting thing about Eusebius was his emblem, his symbol, was the serpent. It was a serpent coiled around a rod. And this was this God's symbol. It's actually still used today by the Royal Medical Corps. And you can see in there, it almost seems like a satanic mockery of the serpent Moses lifted up in the wilderness. So you look at that and you go, maybe that's it. Maybe. But here's the problem with Eusebius. He wasn't a threat to the church either. People who went to that temple weren't going to persecute you. The people who went to that temple were sick. They were ill. They were people you pitied. They weren't a threat. So I'm unsure either of these sources, either of these temples, are the source of the throne of Satan. I don't think it's either of them. A more likely possibility was that this was the place that became the center of worshipping Caesar. And we already know that throughout the Roman Empire, the worship of Caesar resulted in the death of a lot of Christians. Christians who refused to say, Caesar is Lord, but instead said, Jesus Christ is Lord. When you said Jesus Christ is Lord, not Caesar is Lord, you were going against the entire Roman Empire. I think that's the biggest reason why this is the place that's described as Satan's seat. It was the place where men were required, upon pain of death, to take the name of the Lord and give it to Caesar. And to a Christian, there is nothing more satanic than taking the name of the Lord and giving it to somebody else. Now, with that one, it does bring up an actual question. But that isn't a physical thing. What's the throne? What's the physical throne? But isn't that strange? We try and cling, okay, if that's the reason he called this the place where Satan's throne is, where's the throne? What is it? Last week we talked about the synagogue of Satan, and we never ask, where was that synagogue? We looked at that as being a description of a situation, not a building. So why do we do it differently here? A few lines further down. Using the imagery of the throne of Zeus might work as a metaphor, but actually looking for a physical throne of Satan, to me it just seems like we've took the wrong turn in a weird maze. It's amazing how into this people get. Oh, it's the throne of Satan. People go to that. Wherever that city, wherever that is now, that is the city where Satan reigns. I know this is less exciting, but I think the real answer is there was no physical throne. It was because this was the place where you were required to say Caesar is Lord. And, you know, when I started this message off, I was hoping to get into some really exciting stuff with the throne of Satan. I was hoping we'd hit some stuff that was a bit more controversial. And I ended up going, I can't justify that. I can't. It doesn't actually make sense. I really actually feel the whole Satan's throne thing in this passage is a distraction. The point is, this city was full of idolatry. This city was full of wickedness. This city demanded worship to those who are not God. And the church is commended for standing up against it, whatever it was. That's the point.